Good afternoon, Radlib.
Hi.
This is the beginning of season 2. Did you know that, of Lambda Bible Studies channel?
I don't really know what that means. Really.
Well, it's an arbitrary. I took 2 weeks of holiday and decided I'm going to revamp my thumbnails and come back afresh, double down on everything that was good.
Yeah.
So the plan for this stream is
one thing that really confuses me about that is that you said season, because I thought in England it was series. So now I'm really lost.
Well,
I was sure it was series, not season.
Creeping Americanisms. We're going to become. I'm going to start pronouncing my R's next. So for those watching this out of time, as it were, in a couple of weeks is the event at which I will be speaking.
About 2 weeks, I believe.
Yes.
No, I'm sorry. It's a week and a half.
Not this weekend, but the following weekend.
Yeah, week and a half. Yeah.
And I have a bunch of scrawled notes of my own, but I thought, well, let me pull in the wisdom and knowledge of some of the people who are in our circles and might be able to help me out. And then I thought, well, we might as well let people in on those conversations. And so consider this supplementary material to my speech, which is yet to be sorted out. How are you doing? How are you doing, Radlib? Are you well?
Very well.
Good.
I just really briefly, I probably talked about it when I appeared on the Bible study stream, but I guess it's such a part of my life, I don't tend to bring it up because it's just sort of so core to my identity. But my father was a pastor and a missionary to Jewish people here in St. Louis. That's why he came to St. Louis. And he was trained by the guy who started Jews for Jesus. And then reached out to Jewish people, got a lot of Gentiles as well, in sort of the, what's it called? The Jesus People era, right? The 70s, when there was a sort of a wave of young people became Christians. So kind of caught that wave there, started a church, started a couple other churches. This is my dad doing this, right? And then we actually got into inner city ministry later, which I actually participated in for 10 years, working with Black Americans in North St. Louis. And so many other things. I mean, basically, I grew up going to summer camps and winter camps with my church, and later going to conferences, Jews for Jesus conferences. And, so anyway, I just don't know that people might think of me as like the econ guy or something. That's sort of a hobby, but sort of more central to my identity is the world of, I guess, evangelical Christianity, something like that, right?
Yeah, and that's our bread and butter on this channel. Although I imagine, it would be interesting to figure out, of the people listening and watching, how many came through that sort of econ interest that originally kicked things off. I know there's a few people who watch this who, for example, there's people who found us on Twitch. I always streamed both Twitter. No, I do not stream to Twitter. Is that even possible? We're going out live to YouTube and Twitch, and there's people who discovered us on Twitch. So
wow.
There you go.
Welcome 12-year-olds, I guess. I tease.
Well, I looked in the program. The title that has ended up on the program is Austrian Economics and the Bible. But I'm not sure that's exactly what I want to end up talking on.
Well, I'll mention the title that I would have wanted to do if I had been able to be allowed into your great country there, which was, what was it? What does Christianity have to teach reactionaries or the right or something like that? And what does the right have to teach Christians? Because, and that second part, the reason I say it is because, we can't have help but notice that Christian institutions have come under assault as well.
Yeah.
Right. And people like, Vox Day and Academic Agent and people like this have done a great deal of thinking about what do you do when you come under this kind of assault, right? So I could see, I mean, I'm sure there's other things, but I could see Christians maybe benefiting from that. Like, how do we protect our institutions,
Well, perhaps we'll have a Lambda Bible Studies conference, and we can present that half of the of the thesis there.
Right.
But I'm told explicitly that my talk at this event has to be to an audience which is not explicitly Christian, which is great. I don't want to think that there'll be no one in the room except my own audience. Well, not that my own audience is entirely Christian, but leaning that way. So I guess maybe I'll open it up with just what are your thoughts? What can reactionaries learn from Christianity?
And so
what's the place for Christianity within this movement?
I'm going to start with a bit of whinging. Is that what you guys say? Anyway.
Yes.
I'm going to start with a bit of that real quick because some of the ways that Christians have engaged with these circles, I've been displeased with. So I'm not going to name names or anything, but I just want to share something I shared with someone who's not a Christian but is in our circles, and it's my quick how do we put it, vernacular retelling of a story from the Bible with a little pointed moral in it. So here it is. Paul casts an evil spirit out of a woman in Philippi. She's been making money for some men with fortune telling, so they're pissed when Paul cures her, right? So the men get Paul and his friend thrown in jail. While in jail, there's a violent earthquake that bursts open the cell doors. When a Roman jailer lets someone escape, he would be executed. So the jailer wakes, sees what the earthquake has done, and is getting ready to kill himself. But Paul shouts, "Don't harm yourself, we're all here." And so the jailer comes to Paul. He falls trembling before Paul, and he says, "What must I do to be saved?" Now, this is the part where we pause, and I do the not so subtle moral of the story. That is, what are the possible things that Paul could talk about at this point? Let's think about some things. He could wax philosophical. He could instruct his jailer on the various Christian sects, like you remember, Paul versus Apollo and this sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
And the Judaizers, right? He could talk about all that, and I just want to emphasize to you that the Paul version of Christianity is the right version of Christianity. I just want to say that right up front, okay? Right.
It's just easier to clarify straight away.
right. Yeah. He could have done all these various things. But what do we find? No, he cuts to the chase and he gives it to the jailer straight. He says, "Believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved, you and your household." And the jailer and all his household do believe. And it says the jailer was filled with joy. It says something that's lacking in our circles sometimes, right? A lot of despair. And black pilling, I think. A lot of lack of hope, right? So that's why I emphasized that last bit, that he was filled with joy. And C.S. Lewis emphasized the same thing in his biography, right? Autobiography, Surprised by Joy. So anyway, I think I drove the point home unsubtly enough, so I don't think we need to dwell on that. I guess there is one more thought, and I wish I could find the passage. I used to know my Kierkegaard better, but Kierkegaard has this passage where he's talking about understanding the urgency, like when he was talking about giving sermons, I guess, but he's talking about, we're born into a crisis situation in the world. And there are times when you should just be addressing that. And you should, kind of similar point I just made, don't do a bunch of distracting stuff. You need to cut to the chase, and you need to speak to people where they're hurting and where, right. And give them real solutions and stuff. So anyway, that I guess segues into, I just jotted down a few thoughts on what does Jesus provide to reactionaries. And let me start before Jesus, just so to speak. Francis Schaeffer said that if he's got an hour to witness to a modern person, he'd spend 50 to 55 minutes talking about the law and the last 5 minutes giving them the gospel, right? that is, yeah, because you need some foundation to even understand, like, why is the gospel good news, right? Now, that's one advantage we have, actually. That particular issue he's bringing up in these circles is, I think there's much less of the everything's relative and subjective, and there shouldn't be no one should judge each other, judge anyone, all that kind of, like, basically there shouldn't be any standards and there shouldn't be any judgment. You get a lot less of that in right-wing circles, I think it's fair to say, than you do in sort of regular normie culture, right? But I think one thing that has been coming to mind quite a bit from sort of the law is, all have fallen short of the glory of God, right? I think, people knowing my background with, Jewish evangelism and stuff might wonder, like, how do I handle, the JQ type stuff? And I'm like, okay, all my life, my when I was young, my focus was, my research focus was mass murder, genocide type stuff, right? So all my life I've been studying the worst wickedness and horribleness of man, right? And now they're telling me some more, It's like, yeah, well, welcome to the party, right? I mean, all have fallen short of the glory of God. And to me, the reason that lesson is so key for right-wingers is because it helps you to not have that, I found the bad guy thing. So we talked about that. He said, wouldn't it be so easy if we could just say, that little group over there, they're the bad guys. We just gotta, send them away, cut them off, kill them, whatever, and then everything will be hunky-dory, right? And he says, but the problem with that is that the line between good and evil goes right through our hearts, right? It's not so easy to just find the bad and eject it because it's in us, right? So I feel like there's a lesson there to be learned, which is not strictly speaking about Jesus, right? It's more the biblical view of man and fallenness, right? But anyway, turning to Jesus himself, I mean, step one, part of the reason I shared that story with Paul is just meaning, right? It seems like what you see with someone like Academic Agent is that he can see that there's something missing, and he can talk around it constantly about how there's a hole in the middle of our culture, right? There's an emptiness there. And it's yielding, and he can see that it's yielding a lot of problems. That vacuum in the middle vacuum of meaning, right? It's yielding a lot of problems. And he even says, I want there to be meaning there, but then he can't take that final step or whatever for personal reasons, I guess. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, Jesus is, as it says in the scriptures, he's the truth, he's the word, right? To use our modern speak, I think it'd be fair to say is Jesus is meaning. I mean, I don't think that'd be too far afield from some of the things that are said about Jesus, right? And in fact, having seen many people come to the Lord over the decades, this is one of the things I hear, besides the joy aspect, is the meaning. Things that seemed meaningless to me, who I was, my identity, so many things in my life that just seemed like, I was all Daria about them, as AA would say, right? So many things in my life seemed sort of Pascal, right? He says that there's a God-shaped hole in our hearts or whatever. That meaning center gets filled, and then it works its way out into our identity and how we engage with our families and in so many ways, right? All these things that seem like pointless suddenly seem to have a point. So to me, that's step one. I mean, I don't know that you can get into it in your talk, but I mean, to be blunt, we need to have a heart in the middle of the body, right? We need to have something pumping there, and for various reasons, the last century, we talk about the great phrase, look what they took from us, or look what they stole from us, right? Well, this is the biggest, right? I mean, World War One. I was over there, Lambda, some years ago, talking to some English, British, and evangelicals, and they brought up World War One. I had no clue. They said, these villages, all the men would get wiped out in a single battle, and I think we all lost our faith, kind of, as a culture. It was just like this turning point, I think it's been a different story in the U.S. than in the UK in that regard, but there was something in the middle of our culture, and you see it throughout the Middle Ages and everything, and now that something is, for many people, gone. So yeah, thoughts?
Yeah, well, JNS77 says, every time I see a Protestant church make blatant propaganda for liberal political issues, which is a lot, I find myself completely demotivated to engage with the church in its current state at all. And I think there's a lot of people who are thinking that way.
Yeah, right. And AA said the same thing, right? He tried going to a Catholic church, and the guy was just given the progressive sermon of the day.
Yeah, right.
Each time, and he's like, "What is this crap?"
So it's not a uniquely Protestant problem. This is infecting everything, including churches.
Yeah, and I don't know what your experience has been, Lambda, but it was my father's policy at our church, and it is my experience of the church I'm at now, and I've been to many other churches where I see this, where they explicitly try to avoid most political issues. Now, because they want to keep the focus on the spiritual, on the heart of it, like, let's get the spiritual right. This is what my dad always said. Let's get the spiritual thing right, and it'll work itself out into the other areas of our life, including politics and stuff like that, right? But when you come to church, you need to focus on that, on the heart of it, the central issue, right? Which has to do with Jesus, with our relationship with Jesus, et cetera, right? That's the heart of the thing. Get that right, which is what church is for, right?
Right.
And then you work it out in these other areas of your life. Now, they would make occasional exception. Abortion has tended to be viewed as something that is not a peripheral issue for Christians, and something that can be addressed at church, But I have never heard in any church I've gone to, evangelical church, that I should vote for such and such or whatever,
no
partisan thing like that.
I'd agree that churches I've been to, there's a feeling that the pastor or preacher or priest doesn't feel it is right to be explicitly political, so they will avoid telling you who to vote for. However, it does have to be said, a lot of things have been politicized in such a way that people don't even realize. So when you're looking out for it, it's very easy to spot liberal propaganda coming from pulpits, almost unawares, or prayers. You hear people saying, I pray that wealth would be equitably distributed. I pray that we would solve the climate crisis. I pray that we would whatever things that people have absorbed and don't even think of as political, and they're becoming the unintentional mouthpiece.
This gets back. This would get back to what the right could do for churches, potentially, right? Help them not get paused, right?
Yes, that's the flip side of the argument. So I guess the people in our circles who are not Christians will be saying, well, it's all very well us helping the churches, but what are the churches going to do for us?
Right. So I think meaning is a big one. And this is going to be controversial, because I think some people are just ready to go totally postal, or whatever word you want to use. People are ready to people are getting really upset, right?
Yeah.
Really radicalized. Yeah. And I think what Jesus can bring is to avoid becoming worse than the thing you're reacting to. And I hesitate to say it, because people are like, everybody's always telling us to cool it, and that's not exactly what I'm trying to get at, though. What I'm saying is that Jesus gives us something to shoot for, to aim at, to become, right? That isn't simply just taking whatever's going on and flipping it or reacting to it, right? So, this is related to the Jesus bringing meaning, right? Jesus brings a telos to our lives, which is, of course, the other problem is that you'll find in reactionary circles is they sense correctly, in my view, in many, many cases, they correctly sense that something is wrong. And they can even point to certain things and say, that's not right. That's going, and things are going in the wrong direction there. And I'm often like, yeah, I think you're right. But then what to do about it is sometimes like, they're just like, well, I just don't want to be that. Yeah. Okay. Well, that doesn't help. After a while, you realize that you need something more than that, right? Than to simply say, that thing that's happening, the globo homo, as we call it, or whatever, that thing, I just don't want to be that. Yeah, okay, well, but what do you want to be, right? You've got to have a different guiding star than just the opposite of whatever you don't like, right? So that, I think, is something else that Christianity, Jesus brings, is purpose, meaning, telos, something to strive towards that isn't stupid, right? It's something that is deep and challenging, and like Jordan Peterson talks about, finding that heavy burden and taking it up, right? Well, that's what Jesus said, right? Take up my cross, right? Christianity is really challenging, in certain respects, right? It challenges us from where we're at to be somewhere different. And gives us some real guidance as to how to get there. So
there is a common accusation I've heard that the progressive movement comes from Christianity. If you take some of the ethics that begin in the New Testament that are sort of uniquely Christian and push them to their extreme, they become the core thrust of the current elite movement, and in some ways, I think there's an element of truth to that idea, in that what we're experiencing in some ways, I think, is like a heresy of Christianity. That most people, their beliefs are totally rooted in Christianity, but it's diverted in a particular way. So there's a concept that if we removed Christianity from the picture, we would be we would solve the errors. How would you respond to that?
Right. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to agree with the point in the similar way you did. In fact, I really owe everybody a video. I keep promising to make it. I keep adding more and more notes, but I am planning to do a video on the diversity heresy, because I think it seems to me quite obvious that, at least in many cases, this is one of those sort of the telos of Christianity things, right? One of those things that we see very explicit in the scriptures. Every tongue shall confess, every knee shall bow, right? People from every language, tribe, and nation will honor Jesus, right? This is something that's very explicit in the scripture. And you could look at that and you could say, see, diversity in the Bible, and then go off about how, well, if we just didn't have the Bible, right? Yeah. So two things. First of all, what is the mistake that the progressives are making? Just like with the socialists, who could say, hey, look, it says in the New Testament, they shared all things in common, right? So that's all we're trying to do, us commies, Well, what's the mistake the commies make? What's the mistake the diversitarians or whatever make? And I could come up with there's many other examples of this sort of thing. They're trying to get the fruits of Christianity without Jesus. They're cutting the heart out of it and saying, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to get what it was supposed to deliver anyway. Well, what do we see? I mean, as we saw with communism, right? I mean, we just see an absolute horrific mess when when that's done, right? Typically, they turn to coercion, right? Where the scriptures, I think, are about people being drawn to Christ, right? Instead, they turn to pushing people around to make this thing happen. We're gonna not just choose to share everything in common. We're gonna take your stuff and put it into the common pool. Or we're not just gonna be drawn through Christ to see people of other nations as our brothers and sisters in Christ. We're gonna make you see them as your fellow human being by shoving you all together, whether you want to or not, right? That's the pattern each time. So anyway, enough on the progressives. That's the mistake they're making. Now, how do we deal with this from a reactionary point of view? Well, I'd say one thing to think about is that cultures have gone off the rails before, right? I mean, they didn't need Christianity to have all these empires in the past lose their vital energy or whatever the heck happens and become degenerate and fall apart, right? I mean, this was done without Christianity many times in the ancient world. So I don't think Christianity is the necessary element. I think you have if you get into the Spinglerian stuff or whatever, you get to that stage and things start falling apart, and it's going to have a different flavor. I'm sure degenerate Babylon and degenerate Rome were slightly different in the way it manifested, right? the way the decline manifested. Well, what's the decline of Christendom going to look like?
Yeah.
Well, it's going to have echoes and memories of Christianity. Does that mean that Christianity has caused the decline? I'm not sure I'm really buying that.
On the subject of Rome, I'm hoping to also catch up with AM and his name has slipped my mind. His Columba, thank you. And I'm going to specifically talk to them about the people make the comparison with the fall of the Roman Empire and say Christianity, see the common element. You bring Christianity in, and the whole thing falls apart. And that in fact, I think Augustine was responding to that to some degree at the time, wasn't he?
Right. Yeah.
This is not a fresh accusation against Christianity.
Right.
Okay. What about is Christianity itself reactionary? I guess in our situation, we consider ourselves part of the West to some degree. We're living under the broad umbrella of the West, and if you were to go back in time, you'd find a larger influence of Christianity. So in that sense, reactionaries who are wanting to see the positives of the past could align themselves with Christians and say, yes, we both want to go to a time, we both agree that was better. That was a better situation. But somebody else pointed out in chat, was Jesus at the time reactionary, or was he more of a revolutionary? That is to say, is Christianity inherently reactionary in any society, or is it just a coincidental alignment of values at this time in this place?
Well, I'd say I'm going to talk about what happened in Jesus's ministry and who he really ended up crossing swords with, right? But I would want to be a little careful about drawing broader lessons from that, because he was in a particular situation, right? And Jesus, or Christians who are really having, manifesting Jesus in their particular historical circumstance, might find that, their opponents are different, right? Because, as we know from the Spinglerian stuff, right, that civilizations will be in different stages and people would be at different points of readiness, and right. So anyway, but having said all that, who did Jesus cross swords with? Well, he crossed swords with the Pharisees, right? The teachers of the law, so on and so forth. That is, he crossed swords with the people who were upholding the conservative religious standards of the day, at least from their point of view. And Jesus told them that they were failing at that. I think it's fair to say that they had somehow lost the spirit of it, right? And they, weighed people down with lots of rules and stuff, but they weren't really being godly. So who he crossed swords with were people who were self-righteous. And I'm just like almost quoting him, right? I mean, this is what he said about them. Trusting Jesus on this. They were self-righteous. They were the establishment. Right. They were in the upper strata of the, they were the elite of their society. And they were the ones telling everybody how to run their, telling everybody how they should live their lives. Right. So, well, you could go a lot of places with that. I tried to be as neutral and not think about current events very much and just summarize the New Testament there, right? His ministry. You could go a lot of places with that. I mean, as I describe that and try to think about our current day, I actually think about progressives in the sense that they are basically on top at this point, right? They control the institutions and they constantly lecture us about what we should be doing. But as reactionaries have noticed, this is not righteous, though they are very self-righteous. We don't buy that they are righteous, right? We think that in fact they present themselves as caring about good things, but their actions belie that, which is exactly what Jesus said over and over to them in very detailed ways in some cases, right? He said, you present yourselves as being charitable, but in fact, and he got into some details of some of their practices and blasted them,
Years says, from what I know of Jesus in the Gospels, he was definitely a good role model, but I don't know if I'd call him reactionary. He certainly was an enemy of the establishment, though. There seems actually to be consensus in the chat. People are saying that Jesus was not reactionary at the time and was more of a revolutionary figure. Now, I guess this is potentially one of these false axes, lenses that gets overused. So in the same way as left and right can, capture certain things certain times, but you can over-apply it. There's kind of do you want things to change, or do you want things, do you want if your society has a current trajectory and some inertia behind it, maybe there'll be one group who think it's going the wrong direction and want to slow down the inertia and even reverse. That's the reactionary or conservative position. And then there's the people who are like, yeah, society's going in the right direction. Maybe it needs a little bit of steering, but let's full speed ahead. And that's progressivism, or that's revolutionary in a sense. Although you could argue a revolutionary could take things off in a kind of side direction, completely, 90 degrees out from either of the other positions. So I think the answer to whether or not Christianity is one or the other, the question doesn't make sense unless you're looking at a specific place and time.
Yeah, to relative terms. I mean, I remember sort of being shocked to see, long time ago, being shocked to see people in the former Soviet Union who wanted to basically go back to the Soviet Union being called conservatives. Yeah. But of course it made sense. Once I thought about it for a second, it was just like, oh, that's a jarring,
Yeah, right.
Or the communists in that case, in that historical scenario, right? So it goes back to Jesus providing a telos, something we aim towards. I think we need to judge ourselves by him, right? And judge our movements and our historical moment by him. I'm less interested in trying to anachronistically take some term and glom it onto Jesus, right?
Sure. I guess one of the questions that people will be asking is, does the Bible support more ideas that will take us in a direction that people in our spheres want us to go in, or the reverse? I guess in particular, one of the things I've had a few discussions about recently is, do Christians get told too much to go with the flow? There's a lot of the New Testament which contains things like the sword is not wielded in vain, and the kind of concepts of like how do you live under an authority that's hostile to you, when some people think we should be not putting up with it. If our ultimate hill to die on is gonna just be Christianity, they can take a lot of things from us before they and just leave us with the essence of Christianity. And in some ways, I would say, as a Christian, that is my position. I think I'm probably not going to stand and fight, unless it is Christianity on the line, and maybe that makes me weaker, right? This is the accusation that Christian. I've seen this thrown around quite a lot. That the Christians in our circles are less devoted to the cause because they have a higher cause, and in some ways, I want to say yes. That's kind of some truth to that.
Right. Okay, so this goes back to Jesus's ministry itself, right? Because there were political revolutionaries, radicals that are talked about in the Gospels, and they were called the Zealots, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. And also, if I'm remembering correctly, Lambda, I think some of the disciples were identified as
being Simon the Zealot.
Yeah,
hanging around. Yeah,
I think so. Certainly, people in his followers were adjacent there. So he was drawing.
It seems like quite a lot of the people following him, if they weren't just there to get the healing and go, they thought he was going to come and overthrow the Roman Empire. That was his kind of end goal. Right.
So they, some of them were themselves, ready to get it on with Rome, and as we know about Masada and everything. I'm sorry, am I saying the right name? Masada. Sorry. As we know about Masada and so forth, just a generation later or so, they did. There was a revolt against Rome, which was put down brutally and all that, right? So these people were around at Jesus' times. He knew them. I think some of his disciples were coming out of those circles, and they were pretty unhappy with him, right? In some cases, they wanted him to be a political leader. And he said, "My kingdom is not of this world." And that was basically his response to them. They're like, "We want you to take over here." And he said, "No, I want to do something different." I think that's one of the points of his clever answer to the Kafka trap of the Pharisees, right? Or whoever it was who asked him about should we pay the taxes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, well, he talks about image, right? Whose image is on the coin?
Yeah.
And then the flip side of it is whose image is on us, right?
Mm.
So in a way, I think what Jesus was saying there is, you guys are thinking too small. You're thinking about something that's temporary, temporal, a situation that's going to change, because the Roman Empire fell eventually, right? The situation is going to change, and I've got my eyes on something much bigger and deeper. Right. And by the way, my dad went through this in his own life, because he campaigned for Barry Goldwater back when he was young, who was sort of a favorite of right-wingers of the day. And I got to find books like None Dare Call It Treason, fabulous title, in my dad's library, and so he was getting drawn into political activism. And he made a conscious decision that he wanted to focus on spiritual change, and then he expected that it would result in other changes, outworking from that, right? But he wanted to go for the heart of it, go to the heart of it, with bringing the gospel to people.
Well, this has been something that's also occurred to me recently, that there's only a certain amount of effort that we each have every year for activities like, preaching or political activism or et cetera, et cetera. Now, if you can truly make someone a Christian, that will have positive impacts on so many other things. It feels like it's like an obvious strategy, right? Like you can, it's almost, you could live inside of a country and never take part in politics at all, never run for office, never even discuss politics with other people, just talk about Jesus and spiritual things. And it will, as a side effect, have positive political change just through the sheer fact that, but not to say that if somebody has different political views to me that they're not a Christian, right? That's not, don't let that be the conclusion from what I'm saying. But I do think there's an essential reactionary nature to true Christianity in the sense that okay, so if you go with my logic here, so often the disintegration that we see morally and economically and etc. Ultimately comes down to people wielding power for greedy purposes. They are they're not ruling for the interests of the people, so they're making decisions that are unwise, and we see elites often, unless we're talking about an unusual wise king who can potentially uphold society, and we see these entropic forces, and they're basically in opposition to Christianity, because Christians will not want to look after their own interests, but look after the interests of others, and they will want to do good and uphold all sorts of things that conflict with what the types of things that power is interested in.
Just a really simple example is, and you don't need to be a Christian to do this, but one of the things I'll see when people become Christians is that they get focused more on their family. They become better fathers and sons and so forth. And I hope it's really obvious to everybody that that's something that pretty directly stands in the way of what the ruling elite are up to at this point, because they're trying to come right into the heart of the family. Yeah. Right. And
actually, if you're oriented in your entire existence for self-interest and power, you actually are a more manipulatable. You're easier to control. You're easier to understand. You can be pushed around. You're a useful tool. Whereas
they can figure your price out.
Yeah. Why do we think that fanaticism is such a target at the moment? Because what is a fanatic but somebody who's or a fundamentalist? That's the other thing they use, isn't it?
Someone who can't be bought.
That's exactly. Yeah. So as long as there are, it's like if you're trying to exert your will on the population and there's just these little pegs that are staying where they are, you don't want that. You want to get rid of those. So inherently, if you are a truly fundamentalist, stick to your principles, religious person of any stripe, that's a threat. Why do we see purges of the priests as well as the intellectuals? It's all the people who have principles who the authorities want to immediately get rid of. So almost, I think this is yeah, maybe the case I need to make. I'm thinking about how to structure things. There's a case to be made for, similarly to what AA has been saying, and a lot of people will agree with, we need something to be a fixed moral code. We need something to inject spiritualism, and perhaps Christianity is the obvious answer because it's just the water we're swimming in. And then there's the second half of the case, which is why Christianity over and above other religions or other roots.
Back on Christianity, the first part of the case. Another thing to put there is we need people who can't be bought, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Academic Agent has been talking about a network of tens, meaning people who have really improved themselves and are functioning in a healthy way, right? And in a high caliber way in terms of their thinking and so forth. Well, another thing you need is, a couple things, right? Courage, moral fiber, as they used to say in the old days, right?
Yeah.
Someone who doesn't just sway with the wind, right? I mean, obviously we need that. And that's something that, this is why the church celebrates the martyrs, right? Because these are people who stood firm when the world came at them with persecution, with threats of death, whatever. These are people who did not back off and stood their ground. They couldn't be bought. They couldn't be coerced, right? That sounds pretty valuable to me.
Yes.
From that point of view, right? Pretty useful quality.
And the people, I mean, I don't know how obvious this is to people who are outside of the church, but the groups, the Christians who are becoming, how was it that the person in chat put it? The loudspeaker for the progressive agenda or whatever. Those churches amongst Christians have always been a bit suspicious, right? That they're not really that interested in the Bible or what Christianity really has to say, and are more after kind of pats on their backs for, virtue signaling is a fantastic coinage, isn't it? It's a very efficient way to put forwards an idea which Jesus talks about explicitly.
Right.
So it's again not new that religious communities can be taken over by groups of people who are not in it for the real reason at all, and are kind of standing up as if they represent the community, but really don't.
Actually, I wanted to comment on this real quick, Lambda. Somebody mentioned Hillary Clinton. I don't know what the context was exactly, but it just made me think about this whole issue of post-Christianity, post-Christians. That is, people who've come out of Christianity. They even speak in Christian speak to some degree. They'll appeal to biblical things. I mean, Lincoln is a great example in a lot of ways. He invoked sort of biblical sounds, though he himself hated Christianity. And it was just a tool. It was just a manipulative tool for him, a rhetorical tool, right? Well, this post-Christian thing is not new. Murray Rothbard, admittedly not a Christian, but a great historian, he argues that at the time of the war between the states, it was effectively a post-Christian North in conflict with the Christian South. That is, whatever you think about the war between the states, the point is, he's saying that by 1861, you already had a good chunk of America that was Clinton types, right? They would invoke the Bible or Bible speak in pursuit of political objectives, but they had no relationship with Jesus, and Jesus was not informing their goals anymore. Right? Well, that's a long time ago, right? I mean, that's a long time ago. I think it should be quite clear by now that you have people, and Bill and Hillary Clinton are great examples, by the way. They really come out of a certain tradition in America, where they invoke the Bible. I think Tony Blair is somewhere on your side. People who really invoke these things, they're trying to press certain buttons because there's some real Christians, maybe they're trying to manipulate, but maybe more so just that there's this Christian memory in the culture. And they're trying to press buttons to accomplish their ends, right? But their ends are not those of the church.
Yeah. Curiously, it doesn't seem to work quite the same over here, because Tony Blair didn't claim to be Christian until after he'd already left office. Now,
interesting. But I thought rhetorically he would get those notes, though.
I wouldn't be surprised if his speeches were also full of little Christian references. In some ways, all of English is right. The influence of the King James Bible and so on. It's unavoidable. We can't help but think in a Christian frame, just purely in an almost Orwellian sense. Our language has Christianity baked into it, and to a lot of extent, that's great. Yeah, I mean, that could be really helpful. That our although they can then be used badly. I think of the kind of blasphemous edge that a lot of people use the word God to, it's maybe a phrase that has particular Christian leanings, and that's actually an unhelpful thing in that sense. I wanted at some point to ask you if you wanted to say a word about the scholars of Salamanca.
Yes, let me jump that down, but I had another thought I want to jump to, if I may.
Okay, I'll let you say your other thought first, but I will bring us back around at some point.
Yeah, back to what does Jesus or Christianity provide? So I mentioned about a lot of blackpilling in our circles, right? It's the worst situation you could be in. I mean, think about it, right? You are seeing that there is a huge problem. You're seeing that your civilization is crumbling around you. You're red-pilled, right? You've cast aside the illusions, the comforting illusions, and you're seeing it really straight that these things are not something to be celebrated. These things that are happening, they're terrible, right? So you have that on one side, but you have no hope, right? I mean, that has got to be the worst place to be. I mean, my heart goes out to many of my friends in these circles, because they're seeing the things I'm seeing, but they don't have the hope that I have, right? And so what do we mean by hope? Well, there's a couple different things. One, of course, is just eternal hope, right? Which is that whatever happens in this life, that's not the end of the story. And that doesn't mean that these injustices will ultimately stand, even though it seems like they got away with it for now, right? There's that kind of hope, the eternal hope. But I think it's more than that, which is, I see so many times people say, no one ever really changes. Well, so can real Christian circles for a while. I've watched people really change my whole life from when I was a child. So it gives me a kind of a different perspective on things, right? I mean, a perspective that I think it'd be nice for more of our friends to have, that there can be real change. People really can change. And it's funny that people feel so hopeless about it, because, of course, our circles are filled with people who changed, at least in this small matter, right? They saw things a certain way. They saw things a certain way, and then their eyes were awakened somehow, and they started seeing a lot of things they weren't seeing before. And they saw reality in general, in my view, in a truer way. They saw it much more truly. So they changed, and yet they'll say no one ever changes, But anyway, but I think being around people who have been really changed by Jesus is a great sign of hope right there, right?
It seems like there must be some connection between the it's not exactly identical, but I think of the story of the Pharisee who waltzes in and says, God, I thank you that you made me such a great guy and all this, and then the guy at the back who just beats his breast and says, like, have mercy on me, a sinner. There should be a sense in which there's a natural journey here. You take the red pill, you realize that all these things were lies that you were told. Then you think, right, I'm going to fix it. Let's get together and solve the problem. At some point, you take the black pill. You realize the solution isn't there. Things are just going to get worse. It doesn't matter that you've found this problem, that you've also analyzed and discovered it to be, in earthly terms, hopeless. But then that puts you in the perfect situation. And you said, you mentioned earlier, who was it? Francis Schaeffer, spending most of the time on the law. What does the law tell us? What was the point of the law? It was to show how hopeless human solutions are. We need a way out, and there isn't an earthly way out. So it feels like that you're 90% of the way there. And
I was going to say I've been wanting to. I haven't done it. I've just had this passing thought, but maybe say it out loud, I'll make it happen. I've been wanting to try to convince Academic Agent to do a stream on Ecclesiastes. I feel like that's where our friends have reached.
Exactly. I always say
how much LARPing there is and how much fake gay stuff there is, right? And they're right? I mean, from the Ecclesiastes point of view, right? It's all vanity,
Yeah. I've often said Ecclesiastes. Like, I used to think, if I got the choice of one book to get everybody in my generation to read from the Bible, I would pick Ecclesiastes over a gospel. This is a radical idea, but the trouble is, people read Ecclesiastes. I remember listening to people who on a podcast who weren't Christians reading it and going, "How on earth did this get in the Bible? It's totally against. Surely it's against what Christians are saying." I'm like, no, it's exactly right. Like, everything in Ecclesiastes is deeply true, and almost shines a light on something that people are trying to avoid. And it's those people who can't help but look into the quagmire who've ended up in our midst. Like, only a certain group can cope with the facing the black pills for this long, right? But at some point you have to be demoralized, and hopefully that demoralization. We have an answer. Like, evil, there's no doubt there's a great deal of evil in the world that has been identified, and those evil people are in power. It makes you angry. There's a righteous anger to that. Like, we want to endorse this feeling, this inherent, like, when will, you could almost take people to Psalms, couldn't you? Like, and say, look, you feel this way, don't you? You feel exactly the same way as the psalmist.
Right.
Where does the Bible take you next?
And all that stuff.
But unlike the message from most of the channels, in the right-wing sphere at the moment, the Bible is ultimately not just optimistic and hopeful, like ultimately hopeful, that there is complete certainty about good triumphing in the end. In fact, the evil that exists is on a leash. Like, it's got parameters that it can exist within, but there will one day be that judgment.
So that's the eternal angle, but I don't want to leave it there.
Sure.
Because like I said, what I've seen all my life is that that hope is manifested here, and it's all around us. But this is the other red pill, right? One red pill is the Ecclesiastes one, where you see the vanity of all these pursuits and that they're ultimately empty, right? But then you get Jesus in the heart of your life, and then you start seeing something else that is also true about our world, which is that God is still there and God is still acting all around us, and in completely unexpected ways. This is one of the things I've been experiencing in my personal life, which is just being surprised a lot, seeing God speak through someone that I would not have picked that person.
Yeah, right.
right? But God uses who He uses, right? And so I think they've got the Ecclesiastes bit, and now we need to bring the other part, which is that we aren't alone. We aren't alone against all this horrible stuff and these horrible ruling elites. There's someone very mighty. I mean, what comes to mind is Elijah, I think. He brings his servant out. They're surrounded by soldiers or something. He brings his servant out, and he says, "Lord, open his eyes." And then he sees like this army of angels, right? that is, we do have allies. This was a great theme that I liked about Tolkien that I brought out in my favorite article of my own, which is on Tolkien. And at the end of that article, I said, one of the lessons we get from Tolkien is to hope, because you don't know where help will come from. So look for it, right?
By the way, we'll have to do a Tolkien stream at some point. I feel like there's a few people around. Philopocrat also comes to mind, who talks about Tolkien a lot, and I think that would be a great stream. So okay, I'm thinking of this opportunity that I've got to talk to collected group of people. Now, much as I would love to just get up and preach at them, it feels a little bit in bad faith they've come to not a Christian conference. I think it's fair to put in some amount of that. Like but I do have to limit it. Do you feel like ethically? Do you see my reservation? I can't.
I don't know. I figured let's
you think just go for it.
I would say this. I figured let's just talk about this movement, these friends of ours, what we are feeling from them, and what Christianity can offer to them, right? What Jesus can offer to them. Let's get that straight in our heads, and then figure out what to say, right? And to me, that the first goal is just to figure out what is our situation here, right? And what do Jesus Christianity have to offer, and then you can figure out how to say it in a way that is suitably Britishly understated or whatever.
You think I won't have a problem with being understated? It's my natural disposition.
Yeah, right. Yeah, aim for the fences, and maybe you'll get a hit. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So yes, I think that's a good steer. Actually, first figure out what's my actual feelings on the topic.
Yeah.
And then the presentation will probably sort itself out.
Listen to the Holy Spirit. Listen to your heart. We know these people at this point, right? We talk to them. We feel what they're feeling to some degree, right? The black pilling, right? And I have a lot of empathy for our friends in these circles. Like I said, I'm concerned for some of them. A lot of them I think have great fortitude and courage, and I think they're going to be okay. But I worry about some of the people on the fringes who are getting the black pilling and are pretty hopeless. So I think there's something really to be offered there, and I don't know how to do it right, but I think that's what needs to be done.
I feel like there's a search for answers going on.
Yes.
And
by the way, I've been here before, right? Because I was a kid, but this was the Jesus movement. They were trying out Eastern stuff, and they were the gurus and all this stuff, right? Everybody we knew had dabbled in a cult and done transcendental meditation, right? And that's the hippie version of seeking. We've got a more of an Julius Evola kind of seeking maybe going on, right? Looking into tradition and stuff like that. But it feels like really very similar. It's that moment right before I think the Holy Spirit is able to really act, is that people are they're begging God to help them, and on some level, on some deep level, maybe not explicitly, right? They're like, help. Yeah.
That's also a very important point here, that the decision of whether or not to follow Jesus is ultimately a spiritual decision, and it's not a rational decision, and it's a spiritual battle, not an intellectual battle. So I can stand up and say, here is an offer, that makes all the rational sense in the world. People who in their hearts don't want to accept it will come up with excuses, reasons not to choose it. We should not measure our success or failure by their reaction. And this is a common thing I'm trying to grapple with in life, that so often you act in an uncertain situation, and then if it has the desired effect, you rationalize that you knew what you were doing was correct, and you felt good about it at the time. And if it doesn't go down correctly, then you think, oh, I made a terrible mistake and I should have known not to act that way. But sometimes you just have to act and accept whatever happens. Have that deep-seated confidence in your own convictions that your actions. I mean, one of the ways that I saw this being obviously the case was in terms of the way that people react being very different. Do you remember that stream looking at the debate between Christopher Hitchens and Tony Blair?
I'm afraid I did not get through that one. Tell me what you learned from it.
Yeah, so I remember watching the original debates back in the day, and the feeling in the room as recorded on the video, and also the YouTube comments at the time were just blown away with how incredibly erudite and successful and logical Christopher Hitchens was. Whereas during the viewing on YouTube of that debate, the exact opposite. Both the people on stream and the people in the comments thought Christopher Hitchens was looked foolish and weak and stupid. Wow. Which was really interesting to see.
Because of it being different crowds, our crowd as opposed to.
Yeah. So although I think a lot of people in our circles, perhaps not me, but a lot of people were at the time new atheists, or there's a lot of people who've gone through the new atheist to Sam Harris to the Douglas Murray slightly softening, and then the Jordan Peterson, and then now I've completely 180'd on this. So but that's part of the energy that we're tapping into, is it not? The kind of everything about progressivism was wrapped up in the Enlightenment, and then into we're going to utopianism, and the utopia has not worked out as well as it looked. There's that sense of looking back on videos, even anyway. The reason I originally brought that up was more to say, somebody standing up and responding to Christopher Hitchens at the time would have been bold flat, whatever they did, because people didn't want to receive what was being said. And we see the same thing happening in the Bible. Jesus constantly being completely run over by the crowds, not accepted in his hometown, almost getting stoned to death and just sneaking out there. We see it in all the way through Acts, people getting treated horrifically for saying the right thing. So I know that the message we have is the hope that people need in our community. But I also feel like it has to be slightly uncomfortable, because it doesn't have to be uncomfortable. It shouldn't be surprising if there's a sense of discomfort about it, because people tend to react again. There's an inherent call to moral living that comes along with the gospel. You're going to have to change how you live.
See, but I don't think that's the hard sell in our circles, right?
I think, that's the interesting thing. People in our circles talk the big talk about wanting to get rid of degeneracy,
Right.
get rid of porn, get rid of this and that. I don't know if they really mean it. I guess we'll find out.
Right.
Like maybe they're doing their save me from, but not yet.
Right. Well, but I just,
you're probably
what it's
right.
worth, I don't think that is something to focus on. That's why I've been talking about meaning and telos and all this kind of stuff, right? Because it's already commonplace in reactionary circles that these things we're seeing around us that are happening that we don't like are immoral, and we ought to be moral instead, right? So I don't feel like that's like big exciting thing to say, right?
So actually Ecclesiastes might be the way to go here. Somebody is suggesting that in chat. And I kind of resonate with this. Like, I love Ecclesiastes. I could talk about it, all day. So I'm very happy to talk about Ecclesiastes. I think Ecclesiastes is like something that will be of interest and exciting to, and maybe seem new and fresh to people who are in the room. And it's an obvious way to say, how do you avoid the devastating logic of Ecclesiastes, which is you can't make meaning out of nothing. You can't ex nihilo, purpose into your life. You have to seek an external authority, something that's real. Is there such a thing? Well, you'd better hope there is. Maybe go and look, see if there's something out there that has a real plausible claim for truth.
Remember, this was Francis Schaeffer's theme, right? He said, there's been these different movements in the West over the last however many 100, 200 years, whatever. He says they would decide that art was like art is where we find meaning, and then like sex is what gives us meaning, right? And anyway, he went through some of these different movements, and in each case they took something and they're basically movement by movement reenacting Ecclesiastes, right? We're gonna run this thing through that, at least in the past, it seemed to have meaning, right? Because it was getting meaning from elsewhere in Christendom, right? But we're gonna take this thing, sort of separate it from the source of meaning, and we're gonna ride that horse until it's ragged, and we kind of give up on it and try something else for a while, right? I mean, it's you could say that Western culture has been living out the Ecclesiastes thing, picking one thing after another and going, oh yeah, nope, this is it. We're going to be really content if we just really focus on this thing, right? Yeah. And then eventually, everybody laughs at them a little while later. Oh, those fools back then, they took that so seriously, and now we know better, and we're more jaded. We're more jaded than they were, and
the wider society seems to be under the impression that if you're white and straight and male and able-bodied, that you have found fulfillment in your life, and it's only everybody else who's been held back from that true meaning. And if only they could find that that complete acceptance that white straight males are. So there's a kind of I don't think that is something to talk to this group of people about, but almost anybody else, you could go to them and be like, well, is this, is that going, when society is as equal as you're hoping, are you gonna be happy at that point, really? Okay, did you want to, because I feel like that maybe I should just drop it entirely. The Scholars of Salamanca angle. I want to talk about it, but I'm starting to think it is. It's not in scope.
You're thinking about the title of your talk.
I need to go and ask if I'm allowed to change the title, probably. But yeah,
don't even worry about it. Just give the right talk and tell them this is not the title I want.
True. If I get it changed in the program, more people might show up as well, because I'm not sure Austrian economics in the Bible is the most scintillating. I need something with a bit more punch. I've been learning recently about how to, do clickbait properly.
Yeah.
It's half the battle.
Get the word hopeless in your title, maybe.
Nice. Or destroyed by facts and logic. That okay. I'll come up with a better title, but I think you're right that meaning. It's kind of countering the Gen X Daria, is possibly the phrase. Not that should be the title, but I think that's
how are we going to accomplish any of the things that everybody wants to accomplish when we don't have a core, when we don't have hope, we don't have meaning, we don't have telos, right? We don't have a direction we're going. It's never going to happen, It's like Rothbard said once: people aren't going to go to the barricades for a 0.5% tax reduction. Like you need something, right? You need something that's real. And one thing that the Daria mentality, the jaded Daria mentality gives you is you identify all the things that aren't real, right? And that's why Ecclesiastes feels like it just speaks right to our circles. Like, man, they can spot fakery, right?
Right.
They can spot stuff that is not what it seems to be and explain to you exactly why it is not what it seems to be and why it's just a trick, right?
Yes.
They see through all the tricks. They've taken all the red pills, as Michael Malice said.
Yeah. They're addicted. Somebody earlier said that they felt a lot of people were addicted to black pills. Do you think there's people who are enjoying, in a sense, the hopelessness? They actually like it. I mean, we've been assuming that the hopelessness is unbearable, but are there people who just revel in that kind of I'm always thinking it's embracing the nihilism. I don't know that anyone humanly can really live that way, but is there a sense in which
for a time you can, right?
When you've been offered enough white pills and they all are wrong, you get quite suspicious.
That's what I was thinking of. That's just what I was thinking of. I think it is a position that you naturally arrive at when you've been fooled over and over again, right? Yeah. And this is something Lewis writes about beautifully in The Last Battle in the Chronicles of Narnia. There's a little section, I recommend it to everybody. These dwarves say, screw all you guys. We don't believe any of you. The dwarves are for the dwarves. And then they're literally like in heaven or something like that. And they won't see it. They won't open their eyes and see it. Because they are devoted to not being tricked again. Right. And of course, this is just a satanic result, right? I mean, what would Satan want more than for everybody to arrive to a place where they will reject truth, hope, love, light, right? Because they're just so sick of being burned. I mean, that's great from a Wormwood point of view, right?
Yeah.
Where you want people.
Yeah, Screwtape Letters is a good. Like that, you can be caught in different traps. Some people are caught in the trap of. You could probably massage this better onto the parable of the sower, but some people are going after utopia in this life, and they don't take it with them.
They're true believers in political gospel or something. Yeah.
But some people just get beaten down and they lose all hope, and they think this is it. I mean, the ultimate expression of that is suicide. Right. When people get completely hopeless and just decide that there is no hope, let's just end it.
And but there's many people who are in effectively the same spiritual state.
I mean, like just spending the rest of your life, even if you go on for another 60 years, not searching because you've pre-decided you're just going to die as the next significant thing in your life. Like that's as good. Right. It's just suicide by old age at that point.
Right, exactly. Right. But you're living in that same state of hopelessness, right? that that would bring you to suicide. You just don't kill yourself. But spiritually, you're in the same spot.
But I think that there is a common grace in the world that you see a lot of people reconsidering religion when they have children. And I wonder if it's because you become nihilistic through whatever's happened in your life. And you think there's just no meaning in the universe. And then you have your children and you just can't deny the feelings are so strong for your children. I don't know. There's lots of speculation about why this happens.
Also, you probably can't bring yourself. Some people can, but most people can't bring themselves to say to their young, innocent child, there's no point. It's hopeless. Yeah. Give up now. Right? It's just cruel.
Yeah. I mean, I even think people can bring themselves to the point where they think, I don't care if I die or I live. And that feels very close to nihilism. But very few people can bring themselves to say, I don't care if my children die or live. There's such a strong, urgent sense of meaning in parenthood. But I also imagine being a parent can be an idol and a distraction in itself. There's a real sense of, I think there's another trap to be avoided, which is immortality through legacy. And that could be children, it could be your intellectual legacy, it could be founding a movement. I imagine there's people in our circles for whom that will be a genuine risk of, I don't need a white pill beyond, being revered by future reactionary thinkers. I can just be part of the good fight, the good losing fight, holding back Cthulhu forever in needless war. Right. Yeah. Okay. I think we probably have 15 minutes, if you're good to go to the hour. I wanted to invite chat if there was anything you wanted to ask while we have Radlib.
I guess we don't have super chats or whatever, right? To focus us in on things.
No, I don't have super chats. I don't think I've got the ability yet. So no, we'll just feel free to stick your questions in now, and if or comments.
I'm actually going back and looking through here. I'm not going to comment, but Ashen Duke says I'm here because of the AA to Orthodoxy pipeline. It's interesting, and he means Eastern Orthodoxy.
We never had that stream with AA. I wonder if the moment has passed at this point, and we'd be better doing the Ecclesiastes thing. But maybe I'm about to blow Ecclesiastes in this talk, so we need a follow-up stream.
Here's one. As all right says, as a fellow preacher's kid who fell away and was found again, did Radlib maintain his faith his entire life? Well, I'll tell you a funny story. I was I back for grad school at that point? Anyway, I was talking to some undergrads at my university when I was older, and they asked me essentially that question. They said, have you always held on to the truth of like Christianity, And I said, well, yeah, but, being self-deprecating, I said, yeah, but I haven't always, lived in line with my beliefs, my behavior, my actions have not always lined up with my beliefs, right? And they were just stunned. They said, well, but how could you know something and not act in accordance with it? And I was like, wow, do you boys have a hard road ahead of you?
Yeah.
That is, they thought that, I think the mental image I got is we're like a brain, a rational brain, and you plug the truth into it, and then you just live in accordance with that truth. Boom, you're done.
Yeah. This is what the Greek...
It's much more complicated than that.
This is what Greek philosophy was aiming for. Like ancient Greek, a lot of it was that idea, right? Like if we can have the correct ideas, we will all be, in some ways it's quite like the, is it Rousseau, we're born free and everywhere in chains. Is that? I always get Rousseau Hobbes back to front. I need to get that sorted. Yeah. So, I mean, I also was, I think, a genuine saved Christian, trusting in knowing I was a sinner and saved, just trusting in Jesus for my salvation from a very young age, before I remember. And I always used to wish I had a more interesting testimony. That
I thought that too. Yeah.
So people sometimes say, "Oh, use your testimony; people will relate to it." I was like, yes. "Oh yeah, I don't. There's nothing there." Obviously, God doesn't stop working in you the moment that you become a Christian, and that Romans 7 is always, to me, the best explanation of what it's like to be a Christian or a human. Really, the things that you do are not the things that you want to do, because we're still living in the sinful world. I know that there are one or two Christian denominations around who claim that once you become a Christian, that you somehow should never sin again. But that seems clearly counter to Scripture to me.
Just to answer, all right. In short, did you maintain my faith my entire life? I maintain my belief my entire life, like Lambda's describing. But I think it's fair to say, and if you watch the video that comes up on my channel, which in fact I was going to share that, so I'll just share it now. If you go to my homepage, you will have a video will start auto playing called the Final Red Pill, and it's about essentially coming in touch with my own brokenness, And so I went through quite a massive transformation relatively recently, actually, in my life, considering that I'm 52 now.
You're a spring chicken.
Yeah.
Do you have that expression?
Yes, we do. We talked about that one. I'm just looking for others to hit here.
Somebody had a question. Stephen, do you think the most important decision you made was marrying the right person at a young age?
Well, I don't know if you'd consider it young. I was 32 when we got married, and my wife was 27, and then we turned 33 and 28 respectively on our lengthy Sicilian honeymoon of a couple months. So we weren't that young. And the fact that we've had all these children is just a blessing, because we didn't have that much time. So we had to make it happen. My wife likes to joke she was built for speed. But I will say this, that I think the Lord really had his hand in it, and I could tell you stories that blow your mind. The Lord really had his hand in it in bringing my wife and I together, and despite her occasionally regretting it, I feel like it was what the Lord wanted, and he is blessing us. Asking the Lord to lead you to the right spouse, and I know it's just hard to find a spouse at all at this point, so it's a difficult.
Well, indeed, Ashra Gunn says, "What's the place to start to make the changes you discuss? As someone who never had a religious upbringing and never has read or been taught the Bible."
Right. Well, if you're really if you're not ready, then read Ecclesiastes, like Lambda and I are discussing. Right. Finish up the work of.
This is the only place on the internet recommending Ecclesiastes as your entry point. I really think it's a thing. Finish up the red pilling, the black pilling, whatever you want to call it.
You're already well on the way if you're in our circles. So just finish that up. Read Ecclesiastes so that you can give up on all the fake and gay stuff, right? Give up on all the fake outs, the tricks.
Yeah. So it's like, the Ecclesiastes is like the ultimate black pill for human meaning.
Right.
And then you'll be crying out for.
Yeah. Then when you're in the pit, I don't know what you'd recommend. In my circles, we often just recommend read the Gospel of John.
Yeah, that's the one I picked yesterday on UO. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that's very accessible to us for whatever reason, we find that people just really respond to the book of John. The first chapter is immediately gripping. Some of the other gospels start with like genealogies, and you're like, what? John starts with the Word. There was the Word, and the Word was with God. And it's just like, it's poetry, and it's beautiful, and it's got that meaning in it right away. And then it spells it out with Jesus's ministry.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say is I'm planning to start a series of Bible studies specifically where all of my guests are similar to you, Ashragan, people who would either describe themselves as not being Christians but being interested, or people who are Christians but don't find themselves comfortably within an existing denomination. So, I mean, feel free to drop in and have a listen to those. The first one will be happening, I believe, this Saturday, and I've got some guests lined up. But I'm very keen to find more people to come and join on those streams. You don't have to consider yourself to be a seeker necessarily. Like, great if you are, if you're really interested, or if you just want to come on and talk about the Bible. Maybe you've got a unique and interesting perspective that you want to share with people. So get in touch. And probably I haven't put. I realize that at the 11th hour, I've not done the description in the video.
It's blank.
Yeah, come find me either on my Discord or on Twitter, where I am at Christian Lambda, I think these days, and get in touch with me, or find a local church, or pray about it. If you are led to become a Christian, God's got you. So don't stress.
Yeah. Closely related to what you just said, JNS77 says, personally, I find some meaning in watching people like you guys, Jonathan Peugeot, Paul Van der Clay, etc. But unfortunately, there's no sense of participation there. Yeah. Well, let me give you a little Christianity 101. It says, do not forsake the gathering together of the saints. Christianity is not, sometimes it has to be because of bad people, but it is not meant to be a solo effort. It's meant to be a corporate affair. We know, man is a social animal. We know in our circles how important community is, family, so on and so forth. Well, spiritually, it's the same deal. If you're just going to sit there in a basement and read the Bible, I mean, God can visit you there, but it shouldn't stop there. You get to the point where you're gathering together with other believers.
I remember knowing this intellectually. I always knew we ought to be going to church, but I can say now in my life, through many seasons, I've seen very clearly the effect that going regularly to a church, even a church that isn't perfect, the way that God's used that to massively benefit me. You don't always want to go a lot. Sometimes you wake up on Sunday morning and you just want to stay in bed, but it's absolutely amazing how God can use that small act of faith to really really keep you, preserve you through tough times, keep you staying strong. Okay, was there another? I think we've maybe got time for one more question.
I'm looking for one.
People chatting back and forth in chat, which is great. Well, perhaps we'll stop here then.
Sorry, I got one real quick. Okay, yeah. Back to the reactionary versus revolutionary. Swickles says, suggesting Jesus was reactionary is suggesting he was rebellious. This isn't true. Jesus was fulfilling scripture, not rebelling against it. Okay, you want to read something right-wing from a Christian? I got something for you. This is the last book that I studied through with my dad. He died a couple of years ago, so it's a fond memory for me. There was a Chinese Christian who was eventually martyred by the communists, if I remember correctly, named Watchman Nee. He's one of the great Christian writers of the 20th century. In fact, I don't think he wrote. I think he spoke and his people around him wrote it down, and later they came out with books and stuff. And there is a book which I believe is called Spiritual Authority, and it will make every other right-wing thing about authority pale. Because, man, this guy takes his authority seriously. Like I'm reading this going, I'm too liberal, you know? It is really hardcore. I think it's a great book for our circles. Yeah, I'm just pulling it up now. Spiritual Authority by Watchman Nee. Yeah, here I'll just read the quick description I found on christianbook.com. Authority is a tremendous thing in the universe. Nothing overshadows it. God's throne is established on his authority. God's authority represents God himself. God alone has authority in all things. All the authorities of the earth are instituted by God. It is therefore important for us who desire to serve God to know the authority of God. I mean, if you're going to do a Christian, like right-wing book, this would be it, I think. This would be like the Christian equivalent of Julius Evola or something.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's strong. Okay. I'm aware of the time, and I know you've got to go. So I just want to say thank you so much for the last, what are we at, hour and a half. It's been extremely helpful for prepping my speech, but also greatly edifying in and of itself. Was there anything you'd like to point my audience towards?
Okay, well, I'll just tell you what I do. I do a pretty secular channel. We'll see how Christian themes come into it, but secular themes, I guess I should say. I got interested in political economy many years ago, and I published a little bit in the field and so forth. And so I used to write for LewRockwell.com, which at the time was like the top libertarian website. And then we had 8 children, and I wanted to re-engage with my hobby of political economy. And so I decided to try out this YouTube thing. And so I started a channel, which is called Radical Liberation. Which is a name that actually I chose Radical Liberation for spiritual reasons before I knew anything about political economy. So that's the true roots of the name. Most people wouldn't know that, but I just put the channel in the live chat. And I just want to mention the series that we're doing. I've got our friend Turnip Merchant is what he's been going by. At my request, he's now gone face reveal and name reveal. So his name is Ryan Turnip Seed, believe it or not. Ryan is really good on American history. And so we are in a series, and I'll just tell you what we're about to do tomorrow and encourage you to jump on the train. We're in a series that I'm calling The Road to Empire, the Road to U.S. Empire, to be specific. We got Tom DiLorenzo on and talked about Lincoln and his real motivations for invading the South. And then we talked about Southern Reconstruction recently, which is where Lincoln's principles were put into effect in the Southern United States. Meanwhile, at about the same time, they started a war to the west in the United States on the Plains Indians, and it was horrendous. And we're going to discuss that tomorrow. And then the next step after that, I expect in this series, is the Spanish-American War, 1898. And that is the beginning of what we now all live under, more or less, whether directly or indirectly. We all live under the sway of the U.S. empire. So I thought it'd be worthwhile to understand its origins, its philosophy, what the American system means. Most people don't even know that term. But that's what you're experiencing globally, is the American system gone international, which goes back to Alexander Hamilton, for example. So anyway, this is all covered and something we're in the middle of covering on my channel. If that sounds interesting to you, please subscribe to the channel and join us. We're live every Thursday talking about politics, economics, and history.
Highly recommend Rad Lib. I can't believe there's anybody listening who isn't already a big fan.
Well, you got these Twitch people, so who knows?
That's true, yeah.
Who knows who they are, right?
Yeah, exactly. Southwest Sam, for example, hello to you on Twitch.
Cool.
So the next stream on this channel, I think, will be Friday night with Columba and Apostolic Majesty, talking about whether or not Christianity caused the fall of Rome. And then we're going to be having the first episode of what I'm calling Lambda Explorers on Saturday night. And I think Poe, amongst others, will be joining for that. So thanks for joining today, everybody, and see you on Friday.